When you think about America's greatest wars, your mind probably races to muskets, thunderous cannons, rows of soldiers, and the fight for freedom itself. But what if everything you thought you knew was missing one tiny detail? A detail so small, most people keep it in a glass shaker, sitting quietly on their own kitchen table. What if I told you one of the most powerful weapons in American history was never forged by a blacksmith, never fired across a battlefield, never carried by a single soldier? It couldn't cut, it couldn't explode, it couldn't even defend itself. And yet, entire armies depended on it. Entire economies were built around it. Entire wars were fought because of it. Its name was salt. Sounds impossible, almost ridiculous. After all, how could something you casually sprinkle over French fries possibly change the course of American history? That's exactly what makes this story so extraordinary. Because history rarely remembers the quiet things, the ordinary things, the things hiding in plain sight that quietly decide the fate of nations. Without salt, the American Revolution could have ended very differently. Without salt, thousands upon thousands of Civil War soldiers would have watched their food spoil long before they ever reached the battlefield. Without salt, ships, factories, trade routes, entire American industries might never have existed in the form we know today. And one unexpected American city would never have become an economic powerhouse. Today, millions of Americans walk past it every single day. A simple white crystal stacked neatly on grocery store shelves. Ignored, forgotten, taken completely for granted. Yet hidden inside every tiny grain is a story of survival, sacrifice, ambition, greed, power, and the making of a nation. This isn't just the story of seasoning food. This is a story about power, about control, about survival, about who lived and who died. Because for centuries, the people who controlled salt often controlled everything else. So, grab your coffee and forget everything you thought you knew about this ordinary mineral. Because over the next few minutes, you're about to discover how one of the simplest substances on Earth helped build America, fed its army, created fortunes, sparked conflict, and quietly changed history forever. This is the incredible, largely forgotten, and utterly fascinating story of America's Salt Wars. Before the U.S. was a global superpower, before Washington, before the Declaration of Independence of America, and even before George Washington became a household name, a quiet war brewed over a tiny mineral that you use daily, and it is in your kitchen. Sounds crazy, right? But during the Colonial America of the 1607 to 1775 era, this white gold wasn't just for flavor, it was absolute survival. Back in colonial days, no fridges or grocery stores around the corner meant your meat went bad real quick. Salt was the ultimate survival tool. By straight up packing everything in salt, families locked in their food for months to survive brutal winters. It literally carried growing towns and fueled the westward push. Without salt, the whole vibe fell apart. Here's the deal. Without salt, America couldn't grow. All this happened in the colonial era because the British government controlled the salt supply by using strict trade laws called the Navigation Acts. The Britishers also stopped American colonists from buying their salt, predominantly from British merchants, and heavily taxed any salt imported from foreign countries. Britishers made the life of American colonists very difficult by imposing unfair taxes on them without a voice in Parliament, and used military force to control them. Therefore, Americans were compelled to fight against the British. When the American Revolution began in 1775, Britain didn't just fight with muskets. They attacked the colonies in another way. And this is where things get wild. Britain didn't just send soldiers. They squeezed the colonies where it hurt the most. British control of the seas cut off imported salt, threatening to rot the Continental Army's rations before they reached camp. George Washington was the military commander who led the American colonies to victory in the Revolutionary War by making salt a critical weapon for American survival. He later became the first first president of the United States of America. George Washington defeated the most powerful empire on earth, the British Empire. He used salt as a weapon to defeat the enemy and also survived his community by repeatedly urging states to increase salt production because shortages threatened both civilians and the army. That's why salt quietly became one of America's most valuable wartime resources. To survive, communities all along the Atlantic coast started building salt works. Coastal communities adapted fast by working around the clock to boil seawater for salt, turning a desperate survival need into a unified fight for independence. America finally won its independence in 1783. The flag still flew, the nation was born, and little by little, salt returned to the dinner table. Most people thought that chapter had closed, but salt's story isn't over. Winning independence in 1783 didn't end the Salt War. 80 years later, salt became another brutal military target because the U.S. government completely rewrote the land laws after conquering the Southwest. And also, American businessmen legally claimed the free public salt lakes as private property and forced locals to pay. Armies launched massive campaigns specifically to destroy salt supplies, centering on one small Virginia town that changed the course of the Civil War. Era 1861 to 1865, when salt became a weapon. America goes to war again, but this time America is no longer fighting Britain. Now, Americans are fighting each other, North against South, brother against brother. By 1861, the American Civil War had begun. The American Civil War tore the nation apart, igniting a secret, behind-the-scenes battle for salt that heavily impacted the conflict. Now here's where things get really wild. Every general knew one simple truth: an army doesn't die only from bullets. Sometimes it dies from hunger. Without refrigeration, Confederate armies relied completely on salt to prevent total starvation. No salt meant spoiled food and a starving army. Here's the kicker. The Union brilliantly targeted southern salt works, especially Saltville, Virginia, to starve the Confederate army without fighting battles. Saltville, America's most important salt town. In 1864, Saltville, Virginia, was a tiny mountain town with a massive secret: the richest salt deposits in the South. Boiling brine day and night, it shipped thousands of pounds of salt daily to Confederate troops, making it the South's vital lifeline and the Union's top target. So they decided to wipe it out. In late 1864, Union forces attacked Saltville to smash its production kettles and cripple infrastructure. Disabling these salt works devastated the Confederacy just as much as destroying weapons, as every day offline meant losing vital food preservation capabilities. The Confederate Army lost another day's worth of preserved food. Imagine that for a second. A war where destroying salt could be just as devastating as destroying weapons. That's absolutely mind-blowing. But America's relationship with salt didn't end on the battlefield. The overall conflict officially concluded with the Confederate surrenders in the spring of 1865. After the Civil War ended in 1865, salt prices plummeted back to normal across the South. After the Union trashed Saltville, starving Confederates clapped back and fixed it fast, but busted railroads ruined their final hustle. Once the blockade lifted, cheap imports crashed the hyperinflation, launching a massive post-war boom that turned salt into a major corporate grind and crowned a new salt city. Railroads were stretching out west, factories were popping up everywhere, and brand new cities were thriving. But while most folks were out there chasing gold, one city got filthy rich off something way less glamorous: plain old salt. So, which American city struck it rich with salt instead of gold? That would be Syracuse, New York. Today, people just know it for college sports and insane snow. Back in the 1800s, workers pumped underground brine and boiled it 24/7 to produce millions of bushels a year, wearing their nickname with absolute pride. And Syracuse earned a nickname: the Salt City. But Syracuse wasn't the only place hiding America's white gold. Now check this out. America isn't just rich in oil, coal, or natural gas. It's sitting on some of the largest salt deposits on the planet. The states like New York, Louisiana, Texas, Ohio, Kansas, Michigan, and Utah have massive underground salt beds that stretch for miles. Some of them were formed more than 200 million years ago, when ancient seas covered much of North America. Miners travel hundreds of feet underground, through tunnels so enormous they look like highways carved into solid salt. But here's the crazy part. We're still finding new ways to use salt. Next time you grab a salt shaker, remember you are holding a piece of history that fed colonies, fueled revolutions, and built cities like Syracuse. America's salt wars were just one wild chapter in a massive global story, where this single crystal built ancient empires and crossed deserts on camel caravans. If this video changed your perspective, hit subscribe, because the full global history of salt gets even more unbelievable.